The Indiana Fever's season has unfolded in a way that reflects both the promise of a rebuilding franchise and the persistent dysfunction of its management structure. On the court, individual performances have given the team reasons for optimism. Off it, a growing number of fans and observers have raised questions about whether the organization is equipped to support them. The issues began surfacing weeks before the particular game that drew widespread attention. Attendance figures, which had climbed sharply following the franchise's high-profile off-season moves, began showing signs of erosion. Season ticket holders reported communication breakdowns with the front office. Concerns aired publicly on fan forums and social media went unacknowledged for an organization that had spent considerable effort positioning itself as a marquee destination in the league. The disconnect between marketing and operational reality was becoming difficult to ignore. Those concerns were further compounded by how the team handled player availability disclosures in the lead-up to the game. The league requires teams to submit injury reports within a specified window before tip-off. When the status of one of the franchise's most prominent players, a centerpiece of the organization's promotional strategy, was not included on the initial filing, questions arose immediately. The omission was not a minor procedural matter. It triggered discussion about whether the team's medical and communication staff were coordinating effectively and whether the coaching staff had adequate information to prepare a game plan. By the time the situation was clarified before tip-off, back soreness was cited as the reason for the player's limited availability. The league's rules on reporting such conditions exist precisely to prevent teams from gaining a competitive advantage through late disclosure. Whether the omission was logistical or strategic was not publicly established, but the incident reflected a pattern of opacity that has drawn criticism from observers covering the organization. On the court, the team adjusted. Without full contribution from its most high-profile player, the burden shifted to the supporting rotation, and several of those players responded. One guard, who had endured an extended stretch of poor offensive production, delivered a clean performance by the standards of her position. She converted every shot attempt she took, finished without a turnover, and moved efficiently within the team's offensive structure. For a player whose shooting reliability had been a subject of public discussion for weeks, a performance of that consistency carried obvious significance. Whether it represented a turning point or a single-game correction remained an open question, but the numbers held up. The backup point guard, working from the starting position in the absence of the team's usual initiator, managed the game effectively. 7 assists against 0 turnovers is a notable output for any player in a pressurized situation. It indicated composure, and it allowed the rest of the lineup to operate in rhythm rather than compensating for decision-making errors. Teams that lack that kind of floor management typically see their margin erode in close games. On this night, the margin held. Defensively, the team showed a physical commitment that does not consistently appear in their film. One player in particular drew praise for taking charges in moments when the team needed to disrupt the opposing offense rather than trade baskets. Taking a charge requires a player to position herself correctly under pressure and absorb contact, forfeiting statistical credit in exchange for possession. It is not a play that generates highlights, but coaches and analysts have long recognized it as a reliable indicator of collective investment. The bench responded visibly. For a team that has struggled to maintain intensity across 40 minutes, that kind of defensive engagement in the third quarter and into the fourth was meaningful, even if it remained inconsistent. The fourth quarter exposed the limitations that have defined this roster throughout the season. The opposing team applied a disruptive defensive scheme in the final period, and the Fever responded with a sequence of ball-handling errors that gave back a portion of the lead they had built. Turnovers in the fourth quarter have been a recurring problem for this group, and the coaching staff has not found a durable solution. Veteran players who are nominally responsible for closing games under pressure have been inconsistent in that role. The win was ultimately secured, but the difficulty in protecting a lead against a team that had no particular offensive advantage reveals something structural about how the Fever are constructed and coached. The broader context matters here. The Fever won a wire-to-wire game for the first time in the current season, a result the coaching staff acknowledged as significant. But the circumstances of how that win was managed, and the external questions that surrounded it, deserve more scrutiny than they have received. Post-game press conferences produced the standard procedural language. Coaches were not pushed on the injury reporting situation in any meaningful way. Questions about the front office's handling of the attendance decline and the team's communication failures with its fan base were absent from the room entirely. That absence reflects a pattern in which the local and national media covering this franchise have defaulted to access-oriented coverage rather than accountability reporting. The result is that substantive failures at the organizational level pass without public examination. The Fever's on-court results this season have been more competitive than the franchise's recent history might suggest. The players, by and large, have performed professionally under difficult conditions. But a single wire-to-wire victory does not resolve the questions surrounding how this organization is managed. Fans who purchase tickets and merchandise in anticipation of a transformed franchise have not received the level of organizational competence that was implied by the front office's stated ambitions. Those fans have been vocal about it. The team's leadership has not responded with equivalent candor. Chemistry on a basketball roster is a genuine factor in performance, and there were moments in this game where the Fever showed combinations of effort and execution that have been absent in previous outings. A guard playing through criticism, a backup running the starting offense without incident, a role player making the unglamorous plays. These are elements that can compound over time. Whether the organization surrounding those players is capable of building on them is a question that will take more than one game to answer, and one that the media assigned to cover this team has an obligation to ask more directly. What the box score cannot capture, and what the Knights' coverage largely ignored, is the texture of how this team processes adversity in real time. Watching the Fever navigate the middle quarters of this game revealed something about their internal hierarchy that the organization's promotional materials have never quite addressed honestly. When the play breaks down, when a set doesn't generate a clean look, when a defensive assignment gets switched in a way that creates a coverage gap, it is not always the most prominent player who initiates the correction. Often it is a player further down the rotation, someone whose name rarely appears in the marketing campaigns, who communicates the adjustment or repositions a teammate before the coaching staff has time to call a timeout. That kind of distributed leadership is worth noting because it suggests the team's cohesion runs deeper than the individual talent that headlines it, but it also raises a different set of questions about whether the organizational structure is designed to retain that kind of player, or whether the front office is paying attention to the relational infrastructure that makes a roster functional at all. The question of retention is not academic. Several players on this roster are approaching moments in their careers where organizational investment or its absence will determine whether they stay. The WNBA's compensation structure creates conditions in which even players who perform consistently well operate with limited financial security. The league has made meaningful strides in recent seasons, but the gap between stated commitment to player welfare and actual contractual practice remains a source of tension that surfaces in locker rooms more often than it surfaces in press conferences. When a front office communicates poorly with its fan base, fails to file injury reports on time, and allows attendance problems to fester without public acknowledgement, players notice. They talk to agents, they compare notes with peers on other teams. The Fever's front office appears to believe that on-court results will carry the organization through its operational failures. That assumption has historically not survived contact with the realities of roster management. There is also a coaching dimension that deserves more direct examination than it has received. The staff made adjustments in this game that were tactically sound, shifting defensive assignments in the third quarter, managing lineup combinations in a way that kept the opposing team from finding a consistent offensive rhythm, but the fourth quarter breakdown was not an aberration. It is a recurring condition. Teams that repeatedly surrender leads in final periods are either not executing what the coaching staff is drawing up, or the coaching staff is not drawing up the right things. After a certain number of recurrences, the benefit of the doubt shifts. The Fever's coaching staff has demonstrated genuine competence in constructing game plans for the first three quarters. What happens at the end of games is a separate and unresolved problem, and the questions being asked about it in the building do not appear to match the level of public accountability being applied from outside it. The media dynamic warrants a separate accounting. Major professional sports leagues in North America have developed coverage ecosystems in which access to coaches and players functions as implicit currency. Reporters who ask uncomfortable questions get less access. Reporters who frame coverage favorably maintain relationships that produce exclusives, features, and inside information. The result is a structural incentive towards softness that operates independently of any individual journalist's intentions or instincts. Covering the Fever this season requires navigating an organization that has made itself difficult to hold accountable, partly through opacity and partly through the implicit leverage that access provides. The reporters who cover this team regularly are professionals operating under real constraints. But the pattern of their coverage, the absence of follow-up on the injury reporting situation, the failure to surface the front office's communication problems with ticket holders, the post-game conferences that produced no friction, reflects an accommodation to those constraints that serves the organization's interests more than it serves the public's. None of this diminishes what the players accomplished in the game. Winning wire to wire, managing lineup disruption without a catastrophic performance decline, demonstrating defensive commitment in moments where the season had previously shown none of those things. These are real results produced by professional athletes working under genuine difficulty. The guard who converted every shot attempt she took has been under consistent public scrutiny, some of it fair and some of it disproportionate to the context. She performed. The backup point guard ran a starting offense without a turnover in a pressure situation. Those facts stand on their own, and the players deserve credit that is not contaminated by organizational criticism. But the separation between player performance and organizational accountability is precisely what the Fever's front office has relied on to avoid scrutiny. The implicit argument that criticizing the organization is somehow a criticism of the players or that it distracts from their accomplishments is a rhetorical buffer that insulates management from consequences it would otherwise face. Franchises with functioning accountability cultures do not require that buffer because they do not need protection from honest examination. The fact that this particular buffer operates so effectively in Fever coverage is itself diagnostic. Looking at the remainder of the schedule, the games ahead will provide additional data points. Whether the fourth quarter problem is structural or situational, whether the guard's performance in this game reflects an adjustment or a sample size of one, whether the backup point guard's composure holds when the opponent is more capable of applying defensive pressure. These are legitimate basketball questions, and they will be answered on the court. The organizational questions are less likely to be answered there, and the structures currently in place, coverage dynamics, front office opacity, the general preference for access over accountability, do not create obvious conditions for resolution. Fans who have invested in this franchise deserve better analysis of both sets of questions. The game itself was worth watching. What surrounds it deserves equal attention.